Live. So Maths Chat Live is a live chat on talking maths, and it works the way it works because it's interactive. It's interactive with you, whichever channel you're listening on. We're live streaming right now on Twitter, on Facebook, and also on YouTube. So wherever you're tuned in from, whatever thoughts you have, share them with us. Put a question to us, and if we can answer and the time's right within the conversation, we'll definitely do our best to answer. So today I'm really excited about our next guest, tuned all the way from Hong Kong, which is one of the exciting things about doing these live streams. Is we are essentially CPD without border. We're borderless, and it's also the topic. Really, one of the things I'm extremely passionate about is teaching children who struggle with learning maths, particularly that early learning journey. It's one of the trickiest things to teach very well, and yet one of the most satisfying. So welcome today, Larissa Chan.
Hi, Atul. Thanks for having me today. Really happy to be here from Hong Kong.
Yeah, my pleasure. So yeah, we could just start off with your introduction, as in what you do at the moment and how you got into Dyscalculia, and I believe you were trained in London, etc. So you can just talk us through that.
Sure. So I'm born and raised here in Hong Kong, where I'm from. But I did my undergrad in London, and then 10 years later I did my master's. And in between, I started working here in Hong Kong in education. And I'm currently a primary learning support teacher in an international school. So that means that we don't do the local curriculum, and I work with English-speaking primary school age kids around 6 to 11. And I've been doing this for the last 5-ish years now. Before that, I was a classroom teacher, and also I have a background in early childhood, kindergarten age as well. And how I fell into this area, and I think I really did fall into it, was by chance, really. And I think my first exposure to dyscalculia was actually by chance back in my undergrad. One of my lecturers was Brian Butterworth. Are you familiar with him, right, Atul?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the sort of big names in dyscalculia, and so that piqued my interest. And then later on, fun fact, my first ever job actually was in research back here in Hong Kong in dyscalculia too. And that was when I was 21 years old. And I never thought, fast forward now, I'd be actually teaching and working in this field. Along the way, I decided this was going to be an area of need because I was starting to work with more and more kids with, weak number sense. Maybe they don't all have a diagnosis, but I was starting to see patterns in the need for the kids I was working with. So I did a PGCE in dyscalculia with Judy Hornigold. And so here I am today. One big part is I'm trying to share more about it, just like you are online, and just raise more awareness and provide staff training and sharing where I can.
Fantastic. Well, it's an excellent background, and obviously some well-known names there. And we were just talking earlier in the chat. I think like people who have been teaching dyscalculia or have been into understanding about it for a while can sort of all be traced back to these names. And like I trained with Patricia Bapty, who works with Brian Butterworth as well. So that's really great. And you did that workshop at it's now, I think it's 2 or 3 weeks ago, at the Lasalle Maths Conference.
Yes,
Maths
yeah.
Conf.
Yeah, that was a great experience, to be able to be in touch with you and lots of other people. One of the perks, I think, of these online meetups is that now I can tune in from Hong Kong. And there's so much more happening, I think, in the UK and US, just for, just size. And so it was a great experience to be able to share and learn from everyone else too.
Yeah, it was great. And I'll use there was so many things in there. I mean, if I chatted around all the questions I had from that, I think we'd be here for 3 hours in the same way. There was another one, which is a linked area. Limes Wright did a presentation on maths anxiety and and the social emotional aspects of learning maths, which we will also touch on because that's closely linked to learning maths and especially dyscalculia. But yeah, just to kick things off with, I mean, me and you are aware of what dyscalculia is, but there's still some way to go for what it is and what it means and what it can be done. So maybe you could start off just by explaining what we think it is at the moment. And
Yeah, I think that's a great topic, and I think we'll need probably another hour just for this. um, I actually find this a very good question when someone says, "What is dyscalculia?" And you probably know this too, Atul. People often say, "Oh, it's like dyslexia but numbers." You know, it is, but it isn't not as the same time. And I think I touched upon this briefly in my chat recently too. That in itself, there's so many question marks because it's all so closely tied to policies and science and lack of definition. So, in short, dyscalculia and math learning difficulties to me is an umbrella term where you have learners with sort of persistent struggles with learning maths. Is that what you would say too?
yeah, I mean, I'm in a very similar situation, right? Parents will often inquire and they'll say, I think my child has dyscalculia, or they have actually got an assessment. Maybe we can start off with this. There's definitely someone somewhere has to decide whether a child has dyscalculia. It tends to be an educational psychologist. And what sort of criteria would they apply? Certainly, from my experience, when I have a child who actually has an official diagnosis of dyscalculia, they tend to have very poor number sense. So, whereas often parents and people think dyscalculia is just to quotes unquote being bad at maths, which are the other areas of maths included. Obviously, everything stems from number sense and understanding of numbers and the four operations, or not even that, just stems from number sense. But I know you're on that Facebook group or you that Dyscalculia one, and often you get people posting questions on integration or like fairly high level geometry, and they think, oh, I can't do this because I have dyscalculia. For well, that's definitely not dyscalculia. So
I'm gonna say, yeah, that's not it either. Yeah, it's not just bad at maths as we're using air quotes here. And I think back to what you're saying about the report, I think it's often a holistic assessment, right? And we're looking at not just math attainment, but also the profile of the learner. Very often it's intertwined with working memory, difficulties, and other sort of I find uh, difficulties in areas that we I think assume are very day to day or trivial things that are unrelated, like directions and sense of time. These are all sort of part of the profile, common profile anyway, because as we know, all learners are unique, even with the same diagnosis. And these kids may have good memory or some not, or maybe they're better at visual, so they might be better in some topics of math. So even I think in a school setting, it might not always be very obvious who's got a learning difficulty in maths because of these sort of buffers. And it's all about neurodiversity, right? I think. And so just having to be aware of where our learner is at. um, they often in research, if you take a look, they talk about subitizing, estimation, and even things like counting will be very, very tricky for our kids.
yeah, definitely. I might just pop in one of the slides from your maths conf, one where you have the actual. It says definitions may differ, impacts daily life, etc. I'm just gonna just put that up.
Sure.
So it will stream to the audience, but me and you won't see it. But you probably have it on anyway. So yeah, there it is. So yeah, it's basically what you're saying is the definitions change depending on government policy or where you are in the world. Again, to complicate matters, no singular assessment. Um,
And it's
uh,
tricky.
mm, but yeah, and you have this BDA definition that's a couple of paragraphs, so I won't recite it, but it's popping up on the screen. And often occurs
Yeah, just
comorbid,
with
right,
that
with other things.
Yeah, often, as I was going to say, often it's occurs alongside other things such as ADHD or perhaps dyslexia, but not always as well. It's not a rule, but often co-occurs, and that's also related to do with common occurrences like issues with memory and things like that. So I do think that it's a very complex situation. And I, out of all the kids I've ever taught, I've actually only had a very few, I mean, maybe like two or three with an actual diagnosis of dyscalculia on the paper. Um, whereas most are dyslexic and or ADHD, and then having poor number sense and also a notable difficulty with math and struggling to sort of keep up with the school demands as well. But in the end, I think what is the beauty of it too is whatever however we approach working with these students and learners works for everybody. I think, yeah, that's one of the great things. And so what I do with this child with a proper diagnosis, quote unquote, with someone who has dyslexia and finds math trickier is probably the same thing. And now that we're doing a lot of online learning, I just have the same sort of like go-to toolkits and virtual manipulatives and websites that I'll enjoy using, and do the same things with these guys.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what was I was going to come to as well. I mean, I might get parents asking me, and I sometimes I just quite honestly say, well, there's many definitions of it. There's the Brian Butterworth number module definition. There is the DFE. No, there was a department here, and there was a 2001 definition that was on the website, but it was taken out. And so me being come from an engineering background, which is if we have a bit of a problem fixing thing. And I remember my mentor Patricia Bapti, who I trained with. She said the solution is more important than the exact sort of definition of it. We can get quite academic about it, and it can become quite overwhelming. But it's just fantastic pedagogy and didactics, which once you learn, for me, I have developed. I teach secondary, I teach GCSE, I teach A-level maths, but I'm teaching adults as well. I have we were talking earlier, I've got a tutee who's 18 with he had absolutely no number sense. 16-year-olds got teaching a parent of a tutee, so it's like none of that matters. What matters is the pedagogy, the approach you take, and it's all after a while, after they've overcome all of that, actually it doesn't matter at all. I've had people overcome dyscalculia. I've been doing this online for a while, and once they've got the models and metaphors and the fluency with the number bonds and understanding addition and all that with the right representations and the right timing, it's all academic. So it's actually how do you, perhaps objective of this thing is actually how do we help students with dyscalculia, math learning difficulties, or just at an early maths journey, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I also mentioned just in my workshop too, it also depends where they are on that day, perhaps one day they were able to do subtraction, you feel pretty good, I feel good, and then the next time we come back it's all gone. So there's a lot of repetition and also trial and error from our end too. I'm sure you'd agree too. Seeing what works and what works for them and what works that day. It's all, we're just feeling it out. And I think maybe the big question here for who's listening here too, there's no one-stop shop or one solution for everybody, right? It's not one size fits all. And we're not here to say, yes, buy this intervention and that's going to solve all your issues, because there is not one.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very customized, depending on who's where in their journey. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
it
works.
is. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, if you are on Twitter, do ask questions, thoughts. I'm just gonna have a quick look if anything's come up yet. Getting a few retweets from our primary colleagues.
Oh,
It's great.
yeah, I think one of the sort of questions here too is the question of diagnosis, and a lot of parents say like, oh, my child's bad at maths. I'm really worried. What should we do? Should we go get this checked out? And I think at an early primary age, one thing I do consider is whether they have the extra time that they need, or as long as if the school has the resources, which I know can be difficult too. Like, do you have the money for it? But as we were chatting earlier too, I just the sort of simple things can go a long way. Having counters, having number rods, and if you don't have counters, use your pennies, right? You were saying. Um, and just sort of we're able to find a way to work with them. And I do think, I mean, I have less experience working with teenagers in that age group, but at that level, perhaps I would imagine the question of diagnosis might come more into play because of the exam accommodations that would be to their benefit. But otherwise, with the kids I work with right now, we just sort of roll with it and see what they need then. One of my challenges, though, is that the school I'm at, it's very, very academic. So the curriculum is just really fast. And so I always have this struggle of like, we're trying to plug in the gaps of their foundational concepts. And then at the same time, oh my gosh, they're doing fractions, but we're still doing subtraction. So what do we do? How do you juggle? What are we doing today? And that's often one of my like struggles to find the balance of. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's the eternal struggle actually, especially when you are at secondary. And I know there's a lot of teachers who work in further education colleges where you probably have children with dyscalculia or what I call suspected dyscalculia, math learning difficulties, etc. And
Yeah.
you are expected to get them mathematical maturation, as Mark McCourt calls it. You are expecting, well, years of mathematical maturation to happen, well, within months, which is extremely difficult, if not impossible. But from a private tutoring point of view, so yeah, as secondary teachers, we always have this dilemma: teach to the test or teach
Yes.
for learning. For me, I've become more for teach for learning over the years, and I try. I mean, we sometimes, yes, of course, teach for the test is gets them the results, and if got oncoming GCSE exam and got a few months or few weeks, yes. But on the whole, when I now take younger students, year 4, year 5, year 6, I have a long conversation with the parent right at the beginning, and I just tell them, like, don't expect any performance improve. I told them performance is not learning. So first of all, you have to think that they can. Maths is more than just getting a bunch of answers correct on a worksheet, and that's performance or an exam. And learning is something that's very difficult to infer and measure. And if you play the long game, children are complex, people are complex. So I say, if you play the long game, you have to give me the autonomy to do what I feel is absolutely appropriate for your child in their stage of the learning journey, irrespective of what's expected of them from the age-related expectations or what's happening in school. So I'm doing multi-base place value with quite a lot of my tutees, which isn't even on the school curriculum. But I'm finding after you start invoking curiosity, and I'm finding some students are becoming curious, and they are thinking, oh, if they can be Roman numerals, they can be Egyptian numerals, they can be other ones, they can be Japanese ones. I can make up some of my own numerals. They start thinking what I call mathematically after a few months, and then I see something incredible happen. Then I see they're actually asking me some very good questions, really intelligent questions.
Yeah, I think what you're spot on. I agree with you about that whole long game thing, and maybe as a private tutor, you actually have more freedom in that sense because I am in a school. But I do think long game is the approach because you want to teach and work with the learner and not, as you said, teach to the test all the time. And actually being able to engage the students' curiosity and also having them to think and talk mathematically is so crucial and actually a big part of the hurdle already because when they start to be able to go, oh, I've got questions, this is interesting, it also helps them with their confidence, right? Then they're also going, oh, then it's not so scary. Like, for example, I talk about fractions a lot because it comes up time and time again, and they're like, oh, I don't know what that means. And I think just like a few weeks ago, I was having that sort of discussion with students as a word problem, but not posed like that. Very simple. You have 2 apples and 3 kids. How do we share it? That is fractions. And then they're like, oh, easy, no problem. But then in number form, they freak out and then they don't see that connection. So I think there's a lot of value in actually stretching their minds and exposure, but in a way that you're guiding them for the long game. And of course, depending on where they are and what their understanding is, how that relates to them in real life is so important too. So it's meaningful and it's more memorable. That's the bigger thing. So that it's not I'm learning fractions because that's this unit currently. No, actually, it's in everyday life, and I actually do it all the time.
Yeah, it's great. I really liked your towards the end of your MathsCon 25 workshop where you talked about your students to make up their own questions. Like it was the dreaded word problems that mean nothing to them. So you get them to make up their own word problems by thinking of a story and then coming up with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I always just say stories. I have more students around the age group of 7 or 8 right now, and so that's probably more meaningful to them and a bit less scary maybe. So then if they're working on, even if it's really simple, we roll the dice to find numbers to do some practice, and then I'll be like, "What's the story here?" And often it's also a fun way to get to know what they're interested in. So if they're saying, "Oh, I've got to share donuts," then okay, maybe there's more food related, or if it's like they often talk about robots or Lego, then we can always talk to them in a way that's their also curiosity and it's more interesting for them.
Yeah, no, that's great. Corina Murg is a regular on Match Chat Live. Has asked a question. I think it's probably more for me than for you, but so
I'm
it's
listening.
possible to help an older student slash adult overcome it.
You want to start?
Um, yeah, I can give you. I've got, yeah, absolutely. I've got a few teenagers and an adult. She has never told me her age, but she's a parent of ex-tutees. Yeah, you can. I always tell everyone it's never too late to learn maths properly. It's
No.
never. Yeah, I just picked up from where she left off in her maths learning journey, and I traced it to around year 3, year 4 level back whenever she did it, and we just built from there. And it's the same journey. And the one of the advantages of having older students is by then they've had considerable life experience, where they have dealt with money. They know what a percentage is. They know things like what a humidity. They might not know how to. They might not have good sense, percentage sense, if you want to call it, or fraction sense. But you can explain things like exchanging money is the same as exchanging in Dean blocks, for example. The principle of exchange remains the same. So you can make that. It's called bridging. You can bridge things from the existing schema to what they need to know. It also they have some false connections, so you need to break them, but you need to find what those are.
Yeah.
But on the whole, I would say it's probably easier to teach teenagers and adults. They have better working memory. An adult comes to you with the will to want to really crack this thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think that life experience will be an advantage for older learners. But I agree with you. There's never too late, and I think this comes in hand with growth mindset of learning math. And this is like I mentioned this too. It's a buzzword, yes, but it's also very true and very important. But having said that, I also think that working with younger kids could, that's when you see the sort of it kind of goes along with their school curriculum more so than teaching a teenager. So that would be maybe that's where the gap is more tricky to handle. But life experience for sure. Like, I can't really talk to kids about currency exchange in the same meaningful way as you would with a teenager or an adult. But I think more importantly too is at that age, maybe with an older learner, you're talking or thinking more about what do they need in terms of strategy and understanding, or as you said, um, untangling any previous previously learned concepts that might be erroneous or it might not be as efficient as it could be, and sort of working on those and sort of making sure that those foundations are solid. And I do think I agree with you. It's never too late. Um, there's actually more research nowadays about sort of people with dyscalculia and MLD going into areas of work that's math related, like engineers or wherever. Obviously, the sort of idea is that they might be more few and far between because maybe the anxiety that often comes with it or the negative experiences deters those individuals to pursue careers in these areas. But it's not impossible because they'll find a way that works for them. And you can use a calculator, right? When you get older, we don't need to work out how much change we can just use our phone to calculate. Whereas actually in school, it's much harder. I have to do long division on paper. I don't do that anymore, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, with my adult students who are they're not at school anymore. Well,
Yeah.
we won't. There's no point doing the long division algorithm or the long multiplication or even the short multiplication one.
Yes. Yeah, just learn what you, as long as you know what to do with your calculator on your phone, that's already much more productive, I think, than
Mhm.
trying to work out super long division with remainder. Some,
Yeah, I
some,
mean, and it's fascinating as well because a lot of these algorithms, the way they're written, is just a tiny more bit efficient than the other algorithm that's not popular at all. If you read Joe Morgan's book, a fantastic book, I'd recommend getting. It's got a bunch of algorithms for division, multiplication, and addition. The expanded form addition, which would be like 234 plus 136. You literally have 200 written down, 30, and then 4, and this is called expanded form addition, which works great with Dean blocks.
yes.
That is not algorithm didn't stand the test of time because you have to write more. So he went for the digit one.
I wonder whether it's just space saving thing, when you have workbooks this big or something. But I fully agree. I just, sometimes if we can have the opportunity to show our learners the other way of writing it out, then it makes a lot more sense.
Mm. It's great though. I think on the whole, things are moving more towards understanding and using. I see this pop up on Facebook groups and with parents especially. They're complaining that the area model is being taught for multiplication, and chunking and all these things. And they were taught not by chunking; they were taught like not grid, sorry, column multiplication, etc. But the chunking, grid, etc. is the area model, right? It's much more. It tells you what's kind of happening behind the scenes. It gives you a much better. It works very well with CPAL and leads to better file transfer, better long-term understanding. And so the system is gradually moving towards things that would be algorithmically inefficient because it takes more writing or more paper, more space, but leads to better understanding. But we don't
Yeah.
need the algorithms. We've got calculators everywhere.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's also a reason why there's this big push towards concept-based learning, right? And there's a lot of work done nowadays that lends itself to, making sure that our learners are learning conceptually and seeing sort of how they can apply their understanding to more than one area so that these different units of math are actually all connected, knowing that subtraction is related to division, which is fractions, and so on and so forth. And being able to represent this in different ways is a very sort of key skill in having that fluidity in thinking. And also this ties in with metacognition as well, right? Knowing what we're thinking and why we're doing something is all part of understanding and learning maths and thinking mathematically as well.
Mm, definitely, yes. I am going to show up one of his slides, the crystal model. I love a model, so like any kind of
Yeah.
diagram. But I believe
Yes.
it is from Achievability.org UK, which is if anyone wants
Yes.
to go there.
Yeah. So it was from that website, and I modified it, and actually, I kept the shape and the idea of it, but the concept actually is, I thought it was a very good way of showing how complex everyone is. And what I did too is also I reorganized and the subtopics too of sort of seeing, these different facets are maybe more involved with reading and writing, and one's more about visual spatial or that sort of perceptual reasoning. And actually, this all is involved with learning math. So it's so tricky and complicated, and any one area that's we a bit more of a hurdle will impact everything else. Or conversely, if it's a strength, then we have to utilize it. So I have some learners who are very strong with reading, so we'll capitalize on that. Or maybe I have learners who are much more visual, so we will spend more time working on sort of visual representation, area models and things like that. But I think this crystal model, the hope for that I was trying to portray is neurodiversity. And in one classroom, we will have a spectrum, a big, broad sort of demographic. And
Mm.
not just the kids with diagnoses or MLD, but anyone. So whether if you have ADHD or not, just good to keep in mind, I think.
No, it's a really, really good. I mean, it puts on all the, if you want to call it variables and all the different
Yeah.
facets of it. There's some dark areas actually, which I assume are the like the core areas, number
Yeah,
sense,
so I
mathematical.
yeah, I had those key areas that are often like the sort of bigger players, so to speak, for maths. But of course, again, there's no rule and everyone is different. But I wanted to highlight some of these areas, and in it you'll see also math anxiety is one factor as well that we should keep in mind for all our learners.
Yeah, yeah, it's really good actually. It's very good to just have it there. Yeah, I'm just it's me and you back, so I've taken the slide off. But again, maths anxiety that were tied in so well with Lime's Rights workshop, who's actually done a lot of research and is also practicing the classroom.
Yes,
Um,
so valuable as well.
mm,
I think that there's it's still a, to my understanding, it's still a growing field, and but having said that, it's like what can we do about it? But also, I think another factor to this is just the awareness is really important. I have one particular student who I talked about at my workshop in Math Comp 25, and it's sort of one of the key research areas is like the sort of link with parents, right? And in this case of my student, it was very apparent. Like this, the mother was always like, "Oh, she got it from me. I can't do math. Oh, I take one look at it and I'm freaking out. It's numbers. I can't do it. Dad does it all." And then so this student is one of those where she's actually all right, but in any sort of setting with maths or when it feels a bit more like maybe a test environment, you see her climb up and she sort of like regresses to very, very basic and ineffective strategies that just, maybe 10 minutes ago, she had no problems that she was able to explain her thinking. And then suddenly it's like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And then going back to counting back in ones, maybe when she was not working in that sort of area that day. But it's a very, very important area that needs a lot more attention, I think.
mm. That was absolutely fascinating, and it was we discussed that in the after chat or the debrief thing after the maths conf, and your use of that video to actually show it was with that child where she was different things, right? It was, I think it was a long subtraction or bonds of
Yeah.
20 type thing.
Yeah, subtraction with borrowing.
And
Yeah.
she was counting in clusters of one because it was reverting to what she knows. Actually, it's very common, and Ronnie the Bird calls it the counting trap, where you count in, and Bernie Westcott calls it counting in clusters of one, which I really like. It's a cluster. It really is a cluster, but it's a cluster of one rather
It
than a
is.
cluster of five or three or two or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a good
and
point. And I think it's just a safety net. And even like going back to fingers, like we use fingers and it's not an issue, but you can just see the sort of like everything goes out the window and we regress to counting in clusters of one or just going back to what's safe. Oh, my 10 fingers are safe. And and then just that sort of like loop. Is this going? No, I don't know what I'm doing. I was counting and I forgot. And I guess it's all related, right? One of those things where we have to be aware of and identify it, and then how can we work with it?
yeah, and it's something I see as well quite often, that the students forget stuff. Like forgetting is a huge part of learning. We're designed to forget. If we learned everything, like everything we see in our daily lives, everything we memorized in the same order of importance, we'd live in a very, very confusing world. The brain is evolutionary designed to filter out most of the stuff and then chuck it out. It's like next day it's gone. That happens to all of us. I do singing lessons, and I forget lines all the time. It's like it's got to be drilled in, like time and time and time again. The brain then says, "Oh, it's coming up again and again. It must be important, so I'll transfer it to the long term memory." Um, so that's also ask parents and teachers generally. Just forgetting is, there's a really great lecture by the Bjorks, Robert Bjork and Elizabeth Bjork, who actually research memory in their lectures themselves. So they research it in a university classroom sense, but they publish, and they talk about retrieval and the fact that there's the old Aristotle quote is the exercise in repeatedly recalling something strengthens the memory. So it's
Yeah.
actually when you're thinking about something, the very process of thinking about what it was actually
Yeah.
strengthens the memory.
Yeah. And I think this is something we should remind ourselves too. Like I'm not advocating for sort of drill and kill exercises where we're always rote learning, but actually there's a lot of value in repetition and practice, because that's when we're sort of strengthening these sort of like pathways in our brain, and hopefully working on this, because forgetting is a very big part, especially for these learners with MLD and dyscalculia. Memory is unfortunately one of those common things. And if you go back to the crystal model, that's going to be one of those highlighted areas. And hopefully with the idea too that if you practice, it's not only a procedural mechanical thing, is with the understanding and with the language, so that if you think back to, and I talked about this before, Sharma's model, the elements of maths with concept, procedure, and language, just being able to support their understanding, so that hopefully if you understood the concept, even if you forgot maybe how to do that math that day, you should be able to sort of explain it through language or have the concept. So, I forgot how to do percentages, but understanding what a percentage is, maybe you'd be able to get to it somehow. But one of the big things I try to do is every lesson with my student, whether it's a small group or one-on-one, to use the beginning of your lesson like a warm-up. And I talked about this before, like it's like stretching for exercise, right? Warm up your brain, so you go use that time to revise, even if it's like math facts or a quick game of cards, so that you're sort of going back to what you did just the last lesson, and then building on from that today, because we're going to forget. And so let's make sure we're back to we're on the same page for today as well.
Yeah. There's a narrative going on through those different lessons, and it's all tied up into something coherent, which but it's slowly being put into place for your pupils as well.
Yes. Yeah. So I imagine it like, when you're going on your, as you said, the long game of learning maths, right? Every lesson you try and take like maybe 3 steps forward, but the next lesson you take 1 step back, and you keep building up, so that you're making sure that you're covering the ground, but you're also recapping and consolidating these concepts and all the things that they're doing. And hopefully through that build their confidence as well, so that, hey, this is not new. We did it before. Now we're going to, give it a little bit more, add a little bit more, stretch it. Yeah.
Great. Karina's got another comment / question. Karina's in the US actually, so between Hong Kong and the US, you've got quite a that's the beauty
everywhere.
of this thing. It's brilliant. She's a classroom teacher, so the tricky part for a classroom teacher would be to teach the regular lesson and have different activities for students with math learning difficulties. I will probably have to ask permission from my school to do that.
I hear you. It's so challenging, and I think this is where I mentioned this too. We have a lot of parameters we got to work within, right? Pedagogy is one thing for math, but also your curriculum is often another big hurdle, is that maybe you cannot stray that far from your curriculum, but where possible, like fitting in whole class activities that would benefit all kids, whether it's like I don't know what the age group is, but whether it's like a counting game, or like something to do with making sure that we're practicing, I don't know, estimation or sequencing, and then having sort of like low floor, high ceiling tasks that are open-ended. We work with all levels, and I think this is where it's easier said than done. I really recognize that. I can say, instead of asking your kid what's 2 times 6, it's like what makes 12. What kind of questions can we come up with? So hopefully your more able kids can come up with it, and your kids who need more support can come up with their level. But again, even that might be tricky to implement in your classroom and in your school. So I really, really, feel for that.
Yeah. From my understanding, for the teaching, the mastery system of the Bloom, for that you would have to homogenize the groups, right? So that everyone's roughly on the same attainment level, and do their lessons accordingly. So if it's mixed attainment, there's different ways of dealing with that, and there's other teachers who do that. It'd be very useful, just to see what's out there on Twitter. I know there's teachers teaching in mixed attainment, and ability settings, etc. It is very complex though, and
Even if I say something like often suggest that if you can't do it in the classroom, even identifying their needs or recognizing their needs, or is it possible to outsource it, and does your school have intervention teachers or learning specialists? And even that can be hard, right? Not all families can have access to extra support or resources, so it is challenging, but hopefully just even having the awareness to look out for these learners in your classroom is step one.
Yeah, I mean, awareness is very, very important. I was actually working with a primary math teacher's child because
Mm.
she knew her child had dyscalculia, and um, got she tried to teach her herself. I mean, it's a maths teacher who's trying to teach her own child, was tutor her own child. It was not good for the relationship, so so they got a specialist. But I had loads of conversations with her, and she said she's now, because she's aware of it, simply because she's aware of it, she's able to pick it out in her classrooms in various settings, and then uh,
Yeah.
try and work out what the best intervention could be, try and get extra support.
Yeah.
Um, so
And some even just the support, like maybe being aware of certain learners, even having the benefit of having a bit of paper on the side for them to scribble, or like which kids can use number blocks more, Dean's blocks more, things like that. Just being aware of like that little bit of a scaffold, or that little bit of nudge can go a long way. But yes, very complex situation. I do appreciate, I think, as you as a private tutor and me as a learning support specialist, where I don't have a full class, like we have a lot more freedom to work with these kids,
yeah,
learners.
definitely. Yeah, I think but definitely in my case, I'm in a much more privileged position because I have that one-on-one time, and the parents can afford it, or they found funding. Often they also find funding because of the special needs are so severe that they can get some funding. I'm gonna so yeah, looking towards my favorite things, which is multisensory teaching using multiple representations. I'm just gonna flash up your slide on the multi-sensory approach. It's got the new icons, and yeah, it's up there. It's got those blocks as well. 2 plus 1 is 3, so you can
Yeah.
talk about concrete, picture, abstract.
Yeah, I think this is probably the building block for a lot of our approaches for teaching, right? Just working through that sequence of starting off with concrete materials, and for I was mentioning this, like for primary level or early years, this could be literally blocks and counters and physical objects, which is so natural in how we teach at that age group. And then going to abstract, so it's visual representations of like drawings and things, and then later on we just do number sentences. And I do think this approach is valuable and applicable to all age groups. So even at secondary level, and one of the examples I was giving was even if you aren't actually using physical counters, which might not be really appropriate if your learner is, I don't know, like 18 years old, you might not be using that. But having videos or stories of real life context, it gives that sort of basis to ground abstract concepts in. So instead of just giving a word problem that talks about working out the percentage of a price or on something on discount, give it in a story, or give it in a video, or just in a sort of yeah, something meaningful, and that's all it is. It's just a medium in which you try and convey this. Like, why are we even learning this? When will we use this? And that's giving something concrete. And then we move on to sort of yeah, visual, and then in the end maybe just abstract numbers. And very often, like I find myself cycling through. So just because you might have progressed CPA, you might go back to concrete again another time. And now that we're in the world of online learning, a lot of this is just virtual manipulatives, which is still part of that CPA system and approach, but we're not using physical counters. But if they have it at home, that's handy. But sometimes, it might not be effective or efficient with the space or the setup of the kids in their room. Um, just gotta go what you've got. What do you use in your sessions?
Oh yeah, there's so much in that little 5 minutes actually. So yeah, definitely. I mean, I think for a lot of secondary teachers, abstract is the main method of teaching because that's the language. By secondary is the way we communicate in the mathematics is the most efficient and it's abstract.
Yeah.
But for me, one of the reasons why I like teaching Dyscalculia is basically I've had to learn how to use these manipulatives like two-sided counters, and they're extremely sophisticated. They're deliberately designed to help with long-term learning, and they literally do have to grip the maths in their hands for. And I've had children, teenagers. I had before like using algebra tiles, and one student just said, "Why did no one ever show this to me before? Why did no one ever tell me that completing the square is literally completing a square?"
Yeah. When you hear that, and you feel so good as well. You're like, oh, what a simple solution.
Yeah, it really, a square number, guess what? It actually looks like a square. I've had students tell me that as well. It's like, oh my god, this actually is a square.
Yeah, I think this is going back to what you're saying. It's the beauty of it. Like, I think we are learning with them just as much because through us exploring what materials are good for them, whether it's literally physical materials or a website or anything like that, it's like, wow, it can look like that. And it's all about making it visual or finding an alternative way to represent it. And once you find that, sweet spot, it's like click, right? And you want that click. And I think it also allowed me to really appreciate a lot of these early years manipulatives that you think, oh, they're already in year 4. I don't need those counters anymore. But actually, they're genius. They're there for a reason, and we should keep using them because there's no harm in using them. It
Oh,
only
absolutely. And as and when necessary, almost certainly in secondary. I know there's a few teachers on in the network that use them fairly regularly. I mean, in fact, we've got a next week we've got a Pete Matak, author of Visible Maths,
yes.
Charlotte Hawthorne, Ashton Coward, etc. They are all using manipulatives, especially in year 7 because they're bridging this process between this. They're trying to get them to the apps, and fantastic use as well. And one of my questions to nearly all my primary students is, and it's going to be year 4, year 5. Year 4 is my youngest. Have you seen these Cuisenaire rods? Have you seen these counters? And sometimes they're like, I saw something similar back in kindergarten or something.
Yeah.
So they've been considered too old for the manipulatives in year 4. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. It's like,
Yeah. I think that's one way we should need to like debunk this myth, and it's great to see so much more interest and discussion about using manipulatives. And maybe we gotta just rethink of what we call them. Maybe they're not called manipulatives. I don't know, but they are just so much more valuable. And if we're able to say it's okay to use your fingers to count, we should be able to actually have these materials at the ready for the kids if they want to throughout their learning age. It doesn't matter how old they are, and just having it, even it just gives them that opportunity to see things, and once they get the concept, they can run with it. And I think too that sometimes even for very young kids, they go, oh, I don't need them anymore. Like I know how to do that. I don't need the counters anymore. And so you even have to sort of remove that stigma, maybe even of it's not bad to use these, and it helps us all. And maybe it's a good way to think of how we work with MLD and dyscalculic learners is that all practice is good practice. If it works for these kids, it works for those kids, and it kind of ties so neatly back into the CPA approach and keeping their sort of strengths and areas that need more support in mind, and then we can come up with a sort of customized learning program for them.
it can really be the missing piece. It can be the difference between real struggle and like that light bulb moment, which is what we all live for as teachers, right? Like we make these light bulbs go off. I have another tutee who's just a teenager, and he's got a lot of anxiety around maths, and so he has to sit in the lessons with the parent. This is becoming quite common for me as well, where the children are so anxious that they sit in with the parent, and what I'm telling the parent is actually I am training both I'm training you as well, actually, as a parent. So you should sit in. You're like, I'll be telling you what numbers, digits, numerals are, base 10 is, and so on. And with this particular student, we got the counters out, the two-sided counters, so there's red and yellow ones. And I just got him to make some arrays. So he has 3 yellows, 1 red, and below that there's another 3 yellows and 1 red. So you got 2 copies, the word copies instead of multiples, 2 copies of 3 yellows and 1 red. How would we write that down? Well, a convention is 2 open bracket. So before we wrote that down, I said, you're actually doing algebra. And he was like, he was really fast. He said, no, I'm not. The first thing I was like, boy, what are you telling me? No, I'm not. And then the moment I started introducing a symbolism, Y for yellow and R for red, and 3 reds is 3R and 1 Y, and something just happened. He was like, oh my goodness, this algebra thing, was that all that was? It really was that.
It is, I do think that this goes back to this idea that maybe maths we make it harder than it needs to be for this age group, from like maybe middle primary to throughout secondary. We throw in a lot more vocabulary that's tricky, and then we call it something scary like algebra. And then actually when you get even higher up, there's very few numbers in math. There's more drawings and pictures and letters, and actually math looks like many things. And then we have a very like tunnel vision of what it should be, and it sort of scares off a lot of learners because it looks scary, but it's not so much. Like even saying, we all do fractions, share 2 things between 3 kids, like they all know how to do that.
Yeah.
But actually, fractions. So yeah, it's very interesting. But it's interesting that you comment about having the parents there, because I've had the opposite experience with my students. I often have to tell the parents to leave because they kind of jump in and go, oh, they can do that, this is too easy. And I'm like, oh, we're doing this for a reason. You have to trust me. As you said, it's a long game. And then sometimes I find that my learners get more anxious with parents around. So as I ask them to politely, your child is, building more independence, and they might do better if they have the space for it.
Yeah, that's all good points. Yeah, when I did this initially, I had the parents kind of just interfering or things, and so but I already established whose lesson it is first, and that they're just there in passing. And I when I explain something to them, I do that on purpose. But for the most of it, they're not interfering with it at all. And I get a fade the parents out slowly, because I know the child really needs to think for themselves, and they kind of need to just get comfortable. So that happens. It depends. It's a case by case basis, but some children like the parents. Teenagers typically want the parents out nearly after about like a few sessions. But eventually, yes, it just the parents are faded out of that. But then I communicate to them. But you build. That's why it's a whole team thing. The parent needs to understand what's happening. The child needs to be on board, and of course you need to do what you think is appropriate. Brilliant. Karina's got another question, which is also something I was going to talk about that came from that conversation.
Thanks, Karina.
I'm thinking that there might be less of a stigma for older students if the manipulatives are online versus physical objects.
Very true. I think so too. And now with online teaching, it's a best time ever to jump into this, right?
You don't need to convince me. I mean, I've been doing this for a while. But yeah, I mean, virtual manipulatives are extremely sophisticated. I've been teaching with them when I started with them. I was talking to you on the warm up. There weren't many around 5 years ago, so I used to get students to get 1 penny coins and make the dice patterns, because 1 penny coins cost 1 penny per coin, so you can get those coins. And so there's lots of manipulatives at home anyway. You can playing cards, games, dice patterns.
Playing cards are my go-to. I agree with that. That's so good.
Top trumps are great as well. They have all sorts of things. But what's happened with virtual manipulatives is I call it, they are semi-concrete, because on an iPad, when you're moving a red counter and a yellow counter, you are still manipulating the counter in a pictorial. So you're actually doing concrete pictorial at the same time. You're
Yes.
concretizing a picture.
Yes.
And one of the great benefits of this virtual realm is when you merge the two, it actually does zero out and completely disappear.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's actually sometimes even better to use the virtual manipulatives. I shared recently on Twitter too. I was using fraction circles on from Knowledge Hook, and even that I was doing it, and then my kids were like, "Oh, why didn't we just look at this first?" You know, and that's so much more clear when to talk about sort of fractions and shapes, and compared to using the traditional, this is a quarter and you have a little bit of magnet and four magnets make a circle. You know, they said this is so much better on the iPad, which is true. So there's so much to come as well. And when we have more understanding and more things are created, and so many things are for free. So I
Yeah.
can't imagine, like, when you started out online teaching, that must have been so much more complex, and now it's much easier for the world to play around online.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, just in the last year alone, I'm a big MathSpot fan, and you
Yes,
ask MathSpot Johnny Hall for something, and he's pretty
got
much
it.
got it next week. It's like it's not,
These
'cause,
are the superheroes, right?
yeah. And I met Johnny 3 years ago at a maths
Okay.
conference on the social, and I was telling him, "Oh, I'm using your algebra tiles online." I met these people, and I said, "Actually, I'm already using it online." And then, because then they knew that actually it can be used online as well. So and then they tweaked it and they made it better if it can be used in the classroom via the website online or online, because I was doing that anyway. Online tutors were doing them. So when the pandemic happened, they had the resources ready. They were there. They were just there already.
And you hit the ground running. And I think the more we use it, the more familiar the kids will be, and hopefully it will be more, just like, less stigma, and they just get used to it. And with the shift of using having iPads in the classroom where possible, it probably will be easier for them to keep using it into older ages.
I've just flashed your slide where you had the different pictures using Math Visuals website for online learning. You have that 4 times 7 and 2 times 12 with the beads.
Yeah. Yeah, I use a lot of these websites. Math Visuals from Berkeley Harvard. Those videos are great. Propagation, great way to provocate the lesson and talk about, what do you see, what do you notice, what do you wonder, and then from there go on to discussing. And I think what's great too is that these videos that he creates from this website, you can look at it on lesson one, and then after 3 lessons, you go back to the same video, and it can be used for a different, formative assessment, or just being able to say, what do you see now? And then seeing their growth in understanding and using that vocabulary to explain their thinking too. Um, and then also going on to make connections as well, like, for example, division and multiplication, like being able to discuss, and so they have so much use, and so applicable, and yeah, great.
No, there's incredible resources. Yeah. Just gonna see if there's any other questions or comments. Yeah, great. Cool. We can kind of start wrapping up there. I'm just gonna refer to your last slide. I'm just gonna call it up. It's called the strategies one, where you have talk more, practice, and review.
Oh, I see. Yes, yes. Yeah. I had a little flow chart earlier in my presentation as well, and that's like a general how I approach a lesson, and then the strategies are just sort of reminders for myself. And I think talking is so important, and I'm sure you know too, especially if anyone overhears our lessons with our kids, they're probably more yakking than anything else, and just saying, explain it to me. Why do you just say this? Why this? Why that? Tell me more. Um, and that's really valuable, especially when we can't see them write it out online. It's what else can we do but ask, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, one of my biggest pieces of advice for anyone teaching online, tutoring online. I mean, teaching groups are it's very complicated, but
Right,
tutoring
that's different. That's different. Yeah.
is, for me, like, the first few years of tutoring online was refining how you communicate with the language and how they articulate back at you with language. Because there's something about putting your thoughts and articulating it to someone else. It brings incredible clarity to yourself,
Yes.
and to your teacher as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the examples I shared in my presentation too is sometimes I make sure that we're on the same page with our vocabulary too. So if a kid will say something like minusing or I'm minusing this, then I will run with that too because it's what they have in their mind. It's their vocabulary bank, and just ensuring that I'm understanding what they're understanding so that we can stretch their understanding more, and just to not have any miscommunication too, because I might be sort of, I don't know, you never know, you could be pushing a strategy on the child and they're actually thinking of it a different way, and just to listen to them too and have them explain it to you is also, yeah, it's really, really valuable.
Yeah, no, that was really good. I remember that, with a specific case study I think you had where she was using the word minusing, and you just run with it because that's in her head, that makes sense with that particular term.
Yeah.
And
And
then
then you sound use up make up words, and I'm like, oh, actually, it's not very good English anymore. But never mind, they understood it.
yeah, yeah. And often, I mean, the mathematical language, we can always come to that later. I mean, I have this process where I tell them, well, make copies of this, make copies of that, copies, 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 replace copies off with multiples, replace the word copies with multiples of, replace the phrase multiples of with the symbol that. This is like a very gradual.
Yeah, that's really, really good because then they understand what it means, right? And that helps them visualize as well that these are copies of.
Mm. Brilliant. So, well, we've got one last question we can take. Karina's been engaging very well. Thank you, Karina. Your top go-to online resources, especially for teenagers.
I might have to ask you to go first while I think about this one because I don't work with teenagers so much.
Okay, well, I'll go first and then you can think about. I know there's a
Sure.
fantastic pinned resource on your Twitter, which I will retweet straight away because it's got those virtual manipulatives. But yeah, I'll go with that. So for me, we'll cover this really, really well next week, actually, Karina, because we have a manipulatives live stream with, at the moment, there's 8 of us, and I think almost all of us are secondary, and we will look at, I'd say algebra tiles is probably my go-to. Algebra tiles and quiz and error odds. So with the algebra tiles, you can do 0 pairs, you can do multiples, you can do factorizations, you can do quadratic factorizing, you can do sequences, you can do a whole bunch of stuff. So I would say algebra tiles, quiz and error odds,
Yeah.
two-sided counters, and you can find these on various virtual manipulative websites. MathSpot, my favorite go-to one. There's Braining Camp. There's all sorts of things. I make my own ones up on bit paper because I want my tutee to interact live. So, but those are, we'll actually have a detailed demo of that next week.
Yeah, that's really great. I think it'll be so useful for everybody, primary as well. I think MathBot is very good, but it tends to be a bit more old or more complex for what I use. But I end up falling back to the same. Actually, I end up falling back more to using math visuals, or websites that have videos, or something quick and short to watch so that you can see a concept, because I can't make that video. And then I might, depending on the child, just end up even drawing it on. I mean, Jamboard is a very basic tool, but depending on where the child is at, even drawing it out could be what they need at the time. But otherwise, I just go to websites to use Cuisinart rods and things that they can see, and then just finding games as well, which it sounds more like sounds very basic at times, but there's a lot of value for making it into having a game at the end of your lesson as a way to check their understanding and a different way to represent what you're working on, and for them to have a little bit of fun. So it's like a reward and consolidation mixed together. So I'll try and find a fun game. It could be very simple, to whether it's like matching or even any of those websites that have multiplication, games for the kids, and you earn points, and they that goes a long way because they have fun, and we need more of that, especially when we're distanced and learning online right now.
Yeah, there's loads you can do with the games. Yeah, I mean that's what I do essentially with my. Someone asked me how do you teach number bonds? Well, we just play games with dice. I mean that's how you
Yeah,
teach number. You just play with the numbers until they kind of
yeah,
become internalized. You can't
yeah.
kind of force teach them. That'd be a painful process. So you just play games.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, I know it's late in Hong Kong, so thank you so much for.
Thanks
Uh,
so much for your time, and I really appreciate being here today and chatting all things maths with you.
Great. Yeah, I'll retweet some of your resources so people can check it out, and
And
of
look
course,
forward to your future sessions as well. Learning from that. Next week sounds great.
yeah, this is. I'm so keen to learn from others and share whatever I know. Especially this online medium is the one I live in. It's practically I do meet real teachers in real conferences, but actually this is really my strength actually. So I'm just glad Math Chat Live is one way in which I can bring people together and share some of that knowledge. But
Great. Thank you so much.
thanks, yeah, and thanks everyone for tuning in. So we're just gonna wave goodbye, and I'll stop the stream, and then we can have a quick chat when we finish off the stream. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and bye bye,
Take care.
bye everyone. Uh,